So this subjective understanding of truth, where I can't necessarily judge your value system or whatever else, we're told that this has led to an age of toleration, and yet a lot of those folks who espouse, I think, maybe a postmodern moral relativist view, use the words ought and should and must quite a bit. So how do we arrive at that, sort of a didactic moral relativism?
It's a very good question. That it is obviously a part of human nature to affirm ourselves through moral judgments. And when people adopt the view that all moral judgments are relative or subjective, they turn that into an objective morality too. So it becomes a kind of sin to be other than a relativist. You know, and you see this happening especially in things like the European Court of Human Rights, where when you find people with old-fashioned objective systems of values constantly being called before the judges and reproached for the fact that they are discriminating against people who don't share their values. Right? So it becomes ever more difficult to retain those old-fashioned objective views of what morality is without being condemned on moral grounds for having those views. So that subjective, a kind of subjectivism becomes a moral norm. So it's not that people have really given up on the idea of objective morality, it's that they're making a certain kind of subjectivity into an objective morality. It's a kind of paradox, and you see this paradox already in Nietzsche and people like that who Nietzsche affirmed this, something like a subjectivist view of morality, that what matters, he says, is to will your own desire as a law. You know, it's your own desire and the will to power that is expressed through it. That's the essence of the moral position. But of course, Nietzsche very quickly turned that from a doctrine of liberation into a doctrine of condemnation. Condemnation of all the people who couldn't live in that way and needed the support of an objective framework. Right. And I think you're finding that happening now in the kind of moralism that surrounds the European enterprise. I suspect that this becomes obscure because very often modern moralism clothes itself in the concept of a human right. You know, the idea of universal human rights is a sort of political expression of the 18th century Enlightenment morality, especially it grows out of Locke and out of Kant, and it is what we have retained in the modern world of that noble effort to construct an objective morality without God. Right. You know, and this morality had the form of a respect for universal human rights that we all possess by virtue of our human nature, and which we can affirm against each other, we can lay claim to them, and expect others to acknowledge that claim. Yeah, so it gives a fulcrum outside the individual desire on which the issue can be turned. But it all went terribly wrong, in my view, after the Second World War, when people lost any sight of what the list of human rights consisted of. Originally, in people like Locke and also in Kant, human rights are fundamentally negative things. You know, a right not to be interfered with, not to have your life taken away, not to have your freedom taken away, not to have your property taken away, and so on. And
these would have been ideas that the American founding would have been rooted in.
Essentially liberal ideas.
Right.
And it's a sort of axiom of that way of thinking that your right is my duty. So if you have a right, I have a duty towards you to respect it. If your right is simply not to be interfered with, it's easy for me to fulfill that duty. Mm-hmm. I don't interfere with you, I don't kill you, take your property, enslave you, and so on. But with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights after the Second World War, all kinds of new rights came into existence, or they didn't come into existence, they were postulated by the process that then was initiated, including the right to have a job, the right to have security of home life, the right to have sufficient to cover the basic needs of existence, the right to health care, and so on. And gradually this list of rights expanded. These are not freedoms, but claims. They're very different. It's not a freedom to go about your business undisturbed, but a claim that people are given against each other.
And that claim is rooted in what? A communal desire for...
Well, at the time, it was part of the whole move towards a more socialist conception of the state. Right. Because once you make these claims, if you hold on to the axiom that my right is somebody else's duty, you automatically have to answer the question, well, whose is the duty to provide? Right. And of course, it's not the duty of any particular person, it becomes the duty of society, which is another name for the state. Right. And so it led to a massive expansion of the state's embeddedness in human relations. Whether this was a good thing or a bad thing is, of course, part of the disputes in politics to this day. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the things which separated liberals from socialists. But irrespective of whether you think this is a good thing or a bad thing, it clearly involves a radical change in our conception of what a right is. A right becomes a claim that we can each make against each other. Right. Of course, then this tends to undermine people's sense that there really is any objective authority to the idea of a right. When somebody comes along and says to me that he has a certain claim against me, even though there is no relationship, I tend to think of that as nonsense. And so this confusion about the idea of human rights means that there's a considerable amount of nonsense embedded in our legal systems. Right.